Welcome to sNAPAshots, conversations with practicing, professional, and applied anthropologists. Let's meet our next practicing anthropologist.
My name is Briana Nichols, and I am a postdoctoral fellow in the Center for Latin American Studies at Rutgers University right now. And my subfield of practice is I am a cultural anthropologist with some linguistic leanings, and I work on topics of migration and education in Guatemala.
How did you get interested in anthropology?
When I was in undergrad, I went to a school that had a core curriculum, and I was taking a class on power and resistance. And I went up to the instructor afterwards and I was like, what is this that we're doing here? What is this thing? What do we call this? Is this sociology? Is this history? What are we doing? Because I really love it. This is working for my brain. And the instructor told me, well, I think this is probably most like anthropology. At which point I started taking just a slew of anthropology courses and fell in love with, I think I've always been the type of person who finds people fascinating, and the way in which we operate and organize our social worlds fascinating. And I fell in love with a study that allows us to hold that and cherish that, and honor people's stories in a way that has the potential to hopefully then also make a difference in people's experiences. So that is what got me interested in anthropology. And then I actually became a teacher for a number of years in the Chicago public schools. I got a master's in education after graduating. And I think I approached teaching anthropologically, right? I wanted to learn from my students. I found the educational context really fascinating and upsetting in many ways. And I was working with students who were themselves migrants, often undocumented. And so witnessing, as we would go through this educational process together, the ways in which the system was just not set up to accommodate them, their needs, their families. A very easy example of this are things like parent-teacher conferences, and parents would be really looked down upon by the institution if they didn't show up, right? There were a lot of judgments that came with that. And I found out later that a number of the parents in my classroom hadn't been able to show up because they were afraid to drive, because they weren't documented. And if they drove to school, it put them at risk in a way that wasn't acceptable to them. And does that make them a bad parent? It doesn't, right? But you can't, when the system isn't set up to accommodate the realities of different people's lives, then we create a really unequal system. And so that motivated me to go back to grad school and pursue a PhD. And I actually received a joint PhD in education, in the School of Education, as well as in the anthropology department.
How has the anthropological perspective or training enhanced your contribution to your workplace?
I hope that my experience as an anthropologist, and the way in which I think I see the world as an anthropologist, it's really kind of part of intrinsically who I am at this point. I hope it enables me to approach the workplace with curiosity as opposed to judgment, right? And that includes, I've done a lot of consulting work for NGOs who are doing work in challenging contexts and struggling to do that work. And approaching that struggle with curiosity allows for me to help build bridges between things that seem incommensurate. And that is something that anthropology has enabled for me in a way that, I don't know if other disciplines would. In the same way with my students, I teach undergraduates right now, and, what they are bringing to the classroom is as important, if not more so, than what I'm bringing as their instructor. And I feel like that's an anthropological stance, right? Valuing the emic. And, that's valued in education as well, but I don't know if as explicitly as it is in anthropology.
Do you recall a moment that changed the way you practiced anthropology?
I had a really important experience in the field in Guatemala when I was starting my dissertation research, an experience that fundamentally changed me as an anthropologist, where I had started working, I had a couple of organizations I was working with, and I had started working with one of the organizations, and I came to realize retrospectively that I hadn't developed the types of relationships in the organization that I needed to. And a lot of it came from fear, right? I was, new in the field. I felt awkward and scared and didn't know how to be me in that space. And that organization had some pretty negative experiences with researchers in the past, and ended up asking me not to work with them anymore, not to do research there, basically because of the fact that they had negative experiences with researchers in the past, and they didn't want to risk it anymore. But instead wanted to be taught how to do qualitative research. And so that became my role, right? And it was no longer a research site. I no longer collected any data. I got rid of all the data I had previously collected. And I ended up just working in tandem, doing instruction on qualitative research methods. And then that ended up being something that I worked on with a number of my interlocutors at other organizations, realizing that, it's much more powerful to have the tools, even though this is complicated, right? Because it shouldn't be that the only way you can become legible is to tell your story in this way, right? But nonetheless, having the tools to do it is something that is powerful, right? And so I, have worked with various young people on how to use Atlas TI, how to conduct a qualitative interview, how to, kind of writing myself out of a job in some ways, but that's good, right? I mean, ultimately that's not a bad thing. And that changed me, having that experience of having an organization say, no, we've been too hurt by this in the past. I don't think I realized how inherently weaponized. I mean, I knew it intellectually, but I'm not so sure I knew it internally, how weaponized research in the context where I was had become, and how important it is for us to do that repair work as anthropologists.
Thank you, Briana, for sharing your experience as a practicing anthropologist. For more sNAPAshots, find us at practicinganthropology.org, Meta, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Save the date, practicing anthropologists. Join NAPA at the Careers Expo November 10th, 2023 in Toronto, Canada. See you there.
Inevitably, she was coming with me on interviews and stuff like that, that really my job was to be with people in the fullness of who they are and the fullness of who I am. And that sometimes includes having a screaming 5-month-old, right?
sNAPAshots.